Hi, and welcome to The Working World. I'm Keryn Mendez.
And I'm Jamie Lingham. This week, we've got a great show for you, as every week, but we have a special guest, Vincent Tackoen. He's the founding partner, talent mobility search and talent mobility advisor for Talent Beyond Boundaries, which is one big mouthful, but I can tell you it actually matches up to his profile. Vincent's relocated 11 times and visited 111 out of the 195 countries on the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. Jamie, he not only has, I guess, the experience in talent mobility, but he's also been in an in-house role himself at quite a senior level. So he has a really good understanding of what organizations are looking for from mobility talent, but also what mobility it needs to look like moving forward, I guess, to evolve and adapt to this pandemic. And he certainly has some real gems in here for all our mobility practitioners, not only looking for potentially their next role, but also from a skill set and development perspective.
I agree. I think that, listeners of the show or viewers of the show will be able to see and hear that, their role may not be the same as we all know, as what it was pre-COVID, but I think, as Vincent said, it's a pretty optimistic and exciting future. I certainly left the show, with a little bit upbeat and a bit of a spring in the step.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to know what the next 2 years are going to look like for mobility, have a listen. Hi, Vincent. Welcome to The Working World. How are you?
Very good indeed. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. You know Jamie, obviously, my co-presenter.
I do. Hello, Jamie.
Vincent, it's nice to see you again. It's been a long time. Well, besides when we previously caught up, but prior to that, it's been a long time, and it's great to see you doing so well in your new venture. And I suppose you've got a couple other ventures going on, which is exciting, and good to see you so busy, especially during COVID.
Absolutely. We're happy with that.
Which gives us a really good start to the conversation today, and the fact that obviously you've got your finger on the pulse when it comes to mobility and talent management, or talent mobility, I guess, for merging the two. I wondered if you could share with us, from what you're seeing, what best practice talent management looks like right now around talent mobility.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, we need to understand that we're still in the middle of a sanitary crisis. So I don't think we are exactly out of it just yet. And but we're already seeing different industries reacting differently and how they've reacted differently. I think the one point is that there are some organizations that were able to move quickly into a different model simply because of what they do. But when you look at the majority of the organizations out there, whether we're talking about engineering, construction, healthcare, retail, or hospitality, it has been a massive challenge. So talent management right now is, first of all, was trying to keep their workers safe if they had to work, and try to find alternatives in terms of, we know the working from home, if it was possible, was what they were recommending. But some people just were not that lucky to be able to work from home. So I think the whole sanitary overlay has had a huge impact for the majority of the companies. Now, some that could switch very quickly to all home have done very well. And so that's why I think we've got a little bit of a tech bias here, in the sense that when we look at the larger market capitalization organizations, they've done really well because that switch was so easy.
Vincent, you said that, and I think you're right. I think everybody's been focusing on the sort of work from home and how they could pivot. But that's essentially with the workers who can have Zoom calls and who don't have to be hands-on. I mean, how have you seen that companies are dealing with this? Because it must be, I mean, it's a seismic shift regardless for any business. And I sort of feel like it's that, when you jump off the cliff and you get or into water, of course, but you get the that butterfly feeling in your stomach. I mean, these people who have hands-on roles, how have they, what have you seen, what trends have you seen that they're implementing, or how are they managing, these new restrictions, COVID safe, 1.5 meters, all of those things? What are the things that you're thinking of?
I would say the first part is it has been very challenging. It has been very challenging because, as we know, I mean, here now, just being based in Melbourne, things do change on a daily basis. So you're trying to put almost like a policy for your local offices. But even locally, that changes, let alone trying to do it on a global scale, when every single pocket has had major changes. And overnight, Melbourne went from 0 case to lockdown. When you are trying to manage that, it is extremely challenging. An organization had to basically rely on their workers to do the best they can.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of agility, I guess, that you're speaking about. It is something that some organizations, I think you're right, inherently have built into them from a cultural perspective. And we've certainly spoken to some of those on this series of podcasts. But I'm wondering whether we're getting to a point now where, certainly from a mobility perspective, it's time to, I guess, challenge the thinking around, obviously the pandemic is a lot more enduring than we expected. And so, in what's your thinking around, is it time to perhaps flip the mobility model? And, traditionally we would have always taken, obviously, people to the roles.
Yep.
But, is it time to sort of start looking at more sustainable, robust solutions, like taking the jobs to the talent on a more ongoing basis as a standardized model? And I guess from what you're seeing, what's mobility's role in driving this? Would that sit with mobility, or is that something that perhaps should now sit wholly and solely with talent, and mobility are more acting on a consultative basis?
Absolutely. I wish there was more like a chief talent officer that would look at the whole spectrum. You would have your talent acquisition, mainly local. You would have your internal mobility. So obviously moving people within jobs, within kind of local entities. You would have the work mobility. If any work that was essentially done in one location, if it can be done better in another location, then let's do that. And then the fourth part being global mobility, when you absolutely need specific talent to move to a different location, that would happen. Now, we do know that workforce management is still not happening probably the way we would like it to be. It's still fairly fragmented. Your talent acquisition is one part, your internal mobility is more part of the HRBPs, the work mobility is more strategic, and global mobility is on the side. I think, and I hope that as and when we get out of this, there will be a more concerted approach in terms of getting it all under the same umbrella of talent is important. That's what basically builds and runs businesses. How do we make sure that we've got them in the right place, which doesn't mean that they need to move? How do we move the work? How these people? So I think there is still work to be done. And yeah, more chief talent officer that would have those four hats under them would definitely be the way of the future. But it's going to be an evolution. Again, it's not going to be suddenly everyone is going to move to that model.
You said way of the future and the new model. That's quite interesting. We've sort of heard about this whole new way of working and accessing talent. And so rather than having someone sit in a role for 38 hours a week, you only use their specialized skills and bringing people in for that special portion of work. And is that 10 hours? Is that 20 hours? I don't know. I mean, I just wonder if you could talk to that, what your experience of that, what sort of trends you are seeing emerge, and has COVID actually pushed that agenda forward?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, COVID certainly accelerated some of those changes, on potential changes. But, there are a lot of organizations out there that have already worked that way. Any organization that has a timesheet system has worked in terms of making sure that the skills were used in different ways at different times for different projects. So, and some of it included, the need to move, whether it was on business trip, extended business trip, or short-term assignments. So it was already the case. Now, again, we're talking about times where you can move, when you can move the work to people. But if you can't, then obviously you need to find the talent where they are or bring it there as and when necessary.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if mobility itself as a practice could kind of, I guess you're kind of referring, Jamie, to a bit of that kind of gig working, and whether that's going to increase from a solution point of view moving forward, even just not only for the greater talent, but the mobility practitioners as well. And Vincent, because you're, I guess, working with a lot of candidates, and you're speaking to a lot of organizations around, fitting right candidates into right roles. Can't talk today. I'm wondering if you could tell the mobility practitioners that are out there, and they may be looking for their next role, or they may have found themselves displaced due to COVID. What are some of the essential tools that you're seeing are being demanded by organizations of mobility practitioners, and things that they can perhaps think about building into their toolbox, I guess, to help them keep relevant as we kind of keep progressing through this pandemic? And I'm thinking things like, bolting on comp and ben to their experience, things like that. What are you seeing in that space?
I mean, first of all, what we've seen is that the data side of things have become even more important. The first question they were being asked when the pandemic hit was like, basically, where are our people? What's happening? How should we manage from, data could be as much, immigration data, tax data, legal data, all of that. So the understanding of the amount of data that mobility holds, it is staggering. And so having this understanding of how basically the triggers and the data works around mobility, it's something that probably historically mobility has tried to push out to other parts, whether it's a supplier or the finance team, whereas having that good understanding about the data that is there, and obviously if there are gaps in the knowledge, is actually getting like a secondment into comp and ben, having a secondment into talent acquisition, in order to very much understand the company you work for, what do they do and how do they make money, what are the margins, so after that you can better advise the business in terms of what the talent mobility kind of policy should be.
What I'm sort of hearing, and I suppose what we observed at the start of the pandemic, was a lot of mobility practitioners were really like, oh, okay, here we go. I'm going to lose my job. It's going to be tough because we haven't got the movement of people. But it's sounding like that what you're saying is that the role of the mobility professional is actually evolving, and it sounds like it's becoming a bit more of a consultant type role. It's becoming more strategic. It's becoming more beneficial to the organisation. How would you say that mobility practitioners communicate this with the C-suite team? How do they actually bring this in and say, hey, we're not irrelevant. We're actually more relevant. How do they demonstrate that?
Yeah, I think it's always about talking to the people in their language. In terms of, if you're talking to a CHRO about what mobility does, is understanding how the talent moves and where we get it. If you talk to the CFO, it's understanding what is the cost of a mobility program. If you talk to talent acquisition, is that, is it better to hire locally, or do we have any ways to do it? It's very much understanding that mobility is pivotal in what organizations do. So having the right information to share, the right reports, and management reporting in order to share what matters to them, because mobility is not going to be strategic per se. What is going to be, how they're going to be seen as essential is if you manage to prove that you're helping the business strategy of the organization you work for by getting the right people and the right work done in the most optimal way. So it's about having those conversations, and certainly there've been many more conversation happening with mobility professionals as COVID hit, because we needed to know what was going to happen. And the second part is, I think it wasn't the bloodbath that we initially thought it was going to be. Because at first, if you were telling me like in March 2020, and trust me, I was well placed to know that there was going to be no hiring freeze and no mobility, I wasn't really sure whether we were going to have a business by the end of the year. But it didn't happen. People were still moving. and a lot of them were moving still, probably not to the levels, and it was not across all industries, but there was still a lot of mobility happening. And therefore, those organizations that were still moving people just wanted to understand the data that was part of their organization. And the mobility professionals that were able to do that were the ones that obviously have been seen as absolutely key to their business strategy.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess the gathering of knowledge to have that end-to-end view of how the whole model works is a very important point. And sometimes, and I know even being a mobility practitioner in-house myself, sometimes that's quite difficult to get, because obviously you get quite bogged down in the day-to-day. But it is something you do actually have to actively petition for and put yourself out there. So secondments are a really good way, and it's a good suggestion, Vincent. I think the other piece to that, though, is around proactive gathering of information outside of the organisation by the mobility professional. And so I wondered whether you have any visibility, and we all know as mobility practitioners, there are certain groups out there that we can, industry groups that we can access. There's this podcast, obviously, that can provide you with information. But, you know, I wondered how, in your view, how mobility professionals, you know, access industry relevant and in real-time relevance information through their networks or through access learnings to keep them relevant, where they can go to ask questions of peers, you know, other than popping something on LinkedIn. You know, is there somewhere where they can share the wins and bad stories so that we can all learn from this journey together at the same time, then take those learnings back into our organizations?
Absolutely. So like you mentioned, there are some brilliant industry groups out there that are doing a lot of really good work in terms of events, in terms of topics. I would definitely encourage anyone to follow those, because there is a lot of knowledge happening there. The second part is also, and I'm a big fan of supplier in-house relationships, because your suppliers are basically the key of your success as a mobility professional. So it's actually sitting down. Don't forget that these suppliers have so many other organizations they work with. So having that sharing of good practices with your suppliers, and then after that devise kind of a model that would work for your particular organization. That's the second part. And the third side is, and something I've done all my life, is just sit down like we did, and like Jamie, and sit down and actually have conversation, over coffee, over lunch, over dinner, over a walk, and discuss, okay, Keryn, right now, what are you seeing within your organization? What works in terms of vendors? Exactly like what we did. And if you really carve out and try to get yourself out of too much of your day-to-day, carve out some time and actually spend either in person or through Zoom with people that are either in similar industries or in completely different industries, which is also quite important. Because the biggest bias we have is when you benchmark your function with the people in your industry group, and then forget that there are other industry groups that have done really well. So I always hear, we want to benchmark our policies with all, the mining group or the tech group. You're missing out on a lot of really good practices and, bad and good stories that have happened in different industry groups. So if you do the three things, spend some time with industry groups, and they've got tons of events, spend some time with your suppliers, and ask them, to basically help you, in a sense, also help them, because they can better service your function. And the third part is your own network. I mean, we all have a tremendous amount of people that are ready to help. And I always remember when I needed something, the topic of my email is your insight. And already ego is, cajoled the right way. People know that we're trying to do, and we start a conversation. And this is how you get the most important information from your network about how they manage certain things, because obviously we don't know it all.
You and I were chatting the other day, and we were talking about how big corporations in particular are in their own little sort of bubble within their own ecosystem, and they think everything they're doing is doing correctly. Are you finding that more of these people, and I know you've been in this bubble, this is why I'm happy to talk to you, but are you finding that more of these organisations are branching out away from that sort of top tier organisation that have the deep pockets, that show the glossy stories, and this is what we get from big mobility programs, but we don't sort of hear the failures. We don't hear the tough stories. And I suppose that with learning, you probably learn a little bit more from the tougher stories than you do from the good stories. But are you finding that the bigger organisations are sort of embracing that change through this COVID period, or are they staying sort of quite, in their own little zone?
I think it remains to be seen whether there will be a lot of learnings out of that. I certainly am not hearing that from the tech firms. The bubble remains, I mean, rightly so, because there is the share bubble and the bubble itself. And so it remains to be seen. And so I think this is probably, through Keryn's earlier point, what can mobility people do is actually do that branch out, do the reach out to the other programs to see, what's happening, because otherwise it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If everyone just navigates around their own success stories and they kind of put the bad stories on the side, the community as a whole doesn't evolve, and it has an impact on mobility functions or businesses and on suppliers. So I think hopefully we do, as mobility professionals or mobility suppliers, we do more to do that branch out and try to see there are alternatives. And don't get me wrong, I'm having loads of conversation on both sides, corporates, to say, okay, look out, there are alternative solutions. There are different ways to do it, and people do listen. Maybe that's the good thing about the whole thing right now. People say, okay, maybe we weren't as successful during the pandemic as we thought we would be, and so let's look at other options. So remains to be seen, but I'm very optimistic about the future.
I think you're bang on the suppliers, because what people forget is that a supplier works across a range of industries, a range of different companies. And so they're the people who can go out and bring back the news, and they can bring back the trends, and they can help have that sharing. So I really like that, engagement with suppliers. This is not just a supplier plug, but I think it's just a common sense conversation, just to say, well, hang on, I deal with suppliers who are across a range of industries, not just my industry. So therefore, let's get them in. And maybe this is a great thing for suppliers who are tuning in as well, just to say, hey, look, I have a lot of relevant information I can bring and share with you. It's a good opportunity for them to have a touch point to their client, but also to show that they're not just that one-dimensional, one industry, provider.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Your suppliers are the extension of your mobility program. And absolutely treat them the best way you can, because if they do a great job, including leaving money on the table, which means that this is going to always be our fight in terms of making sure we get budget internally to get the best suppliers, that they've got enough money to invest in the right people within their team. And I think that's absolutely crucial. And having obviously the ability to talk value with procurement, not cost and value. And if that is put together properly, it works. I mean, I've done it. It absolutely works, but you need to be able to leave money on the table in terms of making sure that they are successful in what they do, that the margin are not eroded, because otherwise the service is just gonna drop. So I think it's absolutely
not there in a couple of years anyway. And then
correct.
And I suppose suppliers don't want those people as customers either. Everyone wants to make sure that they're sustaining and investing in knowledge and investing in people. Correct. No, it's a good point.
Absolutely. We've seen some price wars happening, in different parts of the mobility world and on the supply chain. It wasn't good. And as we know, price wars are never good. Therefore, make sure that we talk about value. And in order to show that value, we need to make sure, back to our earlier points, that we know who we talk to. The CFO, the CHRO will approve spending, provided it's about value, but we understand why we're spending more money than what we could get somewhere cheaper.
Great point.
In relation to, I guess, surrounding yourself with, relevant and fantastic suppliers and having them part of your team. And I agree with that, by the way, and the fact that, they are very much they're a great avenue into even benchmarking yourself to understand what other, to your point, Vincent, what other industries are doing, not just your own, but to get that kind of lateral view across. I guess for mobility practitioners, though, whilst they may have that vendor side worked out, given that I guess the roles look very different to what they did 18 months ago from a mobility practitioner's perspective, if somebody was, I guess, was looking for a role at the moment, or they were considering their next strategic move within the industry, I wonder what advice you would give to them around, let's say, the top 3 skill sets, I guess, that you're seeing in demand from some of your clients that you're working with. And I know you kind of mentioned that ideal structure earlier, but what skill sets within that do you think would be relevant for a mobility practitioner to work on or to obtain in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, absolutely. In the job I do, there are 2 questions that matter. Can you do the job, and do you want to do the job? Everything else to me is almost irrelevant. So I think that energy and passion, because you need to be energetic and passionate to work in the field we do. It's extremely complex, getting even more complex, and you need a thick skin. So that energy and passion is very important. The second part, and we've touched on, is the intellectual curiosity, making sure that you're actually seeking that knowledge. We spoke about secondment, we spoke about talking to your peers, to get more knowledge. And so basically seeking to get better at what you do, it's absolutely key and will remain key. And it's not only for mobility. I think this is something that is absolutely important. And then obviously the agility, the ability to realize that, oh, maybe within my organization, the world is changing. And we're seeing many more hybrid roles right now, kind of mobility and benefits, or mobility and talent acquisition. So there is this ability to say, yes, I can do that. And therefore, there's many more doors that will be open for people who are actually curious. Sitting in isolation saying, I only do mobility, this is finance, this is tax, not for me, is not conducive to a particularly good trajectory. And so having these skills, I mean, it's not even skills, it's just almost like a temperament to always be happy with what you do, because it shows. And then that's why people come to mobility, because of that interesting work that we do, even though complex. Always seek more knowledge wherever you can find it, and be very agile and understand what's happening within your organization. And can you take on a little project, a cross-border project, or can you take on something else? Will definitely show, that these extra skills that are very transferable regardless of where you want to go. And also we're seeing many more moves between, it used to be kind of traditional in-house, big four and suppliers. Now it's absolutely going around, because people do realize that those skills are very transferable, sorry, no S at the end. And then the only other part is the data side, the SaaS piece, the tech. So we are seeing people coming from outside the industry into kind of our world, and they all basically excellent skills. So being able to spend some time working for a SaaS, or work some time in analytics, will just make everyone better at what they do in what we think is going to be the world of the future. Yes.
Those hybrid roles that you mentioned, do you think they're a reflection or a result of, I guess, the reduced mobile population, and hence, organizations are looking to kind of make use of the talent that they have by coupling them with another capability? And I guess the extension of that is, do you think that mobility roles will go back to being solely mobility roles once, God willing, this is all over?
Not necessarily. I think there is, ideally, you would like also to be kind of a reward person, and having kind of expertise where there is, like 60% of your time will be on mobility, 20% of benefits, and 20% of, let's say, global comp and equity. So that would be a very interesting role. The reason why, and not because of a cost reduction, but the reason why you only do 60% is because you've got such a great model that basically the outsource model or the suppliers are doing the work that you would typically spend your time on. And so I think from a tactical standpoint, these are particularly interesting roles that are not being driven by just kind of reduction of staff, but just by having more commercial and more effective models.
You're saying that people should be, or practitioners should start to be looking to upskill themselves, whether it's through courses or through just volunteering and taking on more roles in the business that give them that more rounded experience?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm not saying that they're not going to be, full-time, mobility, especially for large programs, but definitely we shouldn't only look at those large programs. We can also look at a lot of smaller programs that will allow people obviously to learn much more, because you're part of developing a function versus caretaking it. And so that's also a possibility to move from a big, large organization to a smaller one when you are, a jack of all trades in terms of reward. You're always going to learn something. You're gonna need to swim at times, but you're certainly going to learn a lot through that.
And it's a deeper, richer experience, really, isn't it, when you have that sort of end to end. Now, a question I had was, have you seen the hiring practices for companies looking at mobility practitioners? Has that dropped off? Is it coming back? I mean, everyone thought that COVID was a 2020 proposition. Obviously, 2021, we're still in the thick of it. It's probably looking at 2022. We'll still continue to a level. We don't know what that's going to be. But do you feel that we've sort of turned the corner as far as the recruitment side of things goes? Are companies gearing up for a return? I won't say it'll be a return to normal, but a return to movement, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Back, as I said, in 2020, I went crying on my mentor's shoulders by saying, what's going to happen to my recruitment firm? And then she told me, because she had been in mobility and in exec search, and she said, absolutely not. It's going to be opportunistic. And the roles that you're going to be working on are going to be so much more interesting. I did not believe her. I did shed my tears. I did not believe her. And it's exactly what happened. In a time where you thought it was all, doom and gloom, the roles became so much more opportunistic. And as far as we're concerned, organizations were able to move from a traditional contingency hires to retainers. They realized that it was so important to get the right people. And so almost our business model changed, because the roles were more senior, they were more tactical, and now we are seeing at all levels, all the way from your relocation consultants type of roles where they want really good people, to all the way to C-suite. It has probably picked up about 3 months ago now. The last hurdle, I think, for that to happen is the end of the summer in the Northern Hemisphere. And I think from September, which is literally 13 days from now, we're going to see a huge uptake and a lot of hires going on within the mobility world. CapEx has never been so high, meaning that it's going to be a lot of investments being done in organization, meaning that talent, and back to our earlier points, if you talk about talent, we're not all going to find it locally or being able to move the work around. And therefore, I think mobility is, it's going to be, and mark my words, a great 2 years to come for mobility professional, for suppliers, and for community as a whole. And hopefully we've learned some good lessons in terms of working as a community. We can all do well if we all do the right things.
You certainly got me excited.
So we've achieved something today.
I know. I need some of that energy, Vincent. Thank you. I'm wondering, just on that point that you're talking about, which particular industries are you seeing that growth in? Is there a focus on particular industries?
I mean, tech, obviously. Yeah. That's goes without saying. Engineering. Some parts of retail. Funnily enough, yeah.
How's I guess, and I feel a little bit for particularly the people who still have to remain mobile, but those industries like mining, for example, where you have to have boots on the ground, right? Like you can't take the job to the person.
Yep.
What is that landscape looking like at the moment? No, I guess not only from a mobility practitioner perspective, but if you have insights around, the recruitment and talent in that space more generally speaking. During this whole period has been kind of front of mind for me around, those people who actually have to still get on planes and do their fly in, fly outs in those horrendous quarantine periods, if you have any insights into what that looks like.
It hasn't really stopped. It hasn't gone to a standstill. It continued to happen, but there is definitely less airtime because it is almost like a necessity. And but it's still happening. Projects are, carried on. I mean, as you know, even here, from a local standpoint, construction didn't stop at all, apart from 1 week over the last 18 months. And so you take that from a micro kind of Melbourne level, because this is where we are, to the macro level, and projects have continued in various parts of the world, with some risk and a lot of risk assessment. But I think if there is one thing that, mining companies do well, is assessing the risk most of the time. And therefore they put in place new measures in order that to happen. But it certainly didn't come to a standstill, because otherwise we wouldn't have been in such a kind of good situation right now from the economy standpoint if everything had stopped. So we know things continue to happen, but we don't get the, BHP decided that everyone can work from anywhere. That doesn't attract a lot, and it would never happen. But when Google says, you can work from anywhere, then obviously, oh, wow, fantastic. But the majority of the projects continued and had to, because otherwise the economy would have completely tanked, even more than it did at some point.
Interestingly enough, I had a conversation with a Western Australia company who they had 20% of their workforce was fly in, fly out, and obviously with the lockdowns going, the uncertainty, there's been a real cannibalisation of the local workforce. And I just wonder how that's going to ring true on a macro level when we look at countries that have dealt with the pandemic well and who have been vaccinated early, as opposed to those countries who haven't. And I just wonder if you think that's going to lead to significant wage costs, significant benefits that have to be put on the table to attract and retain those people, not just in Asia, but globally.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the talent is right now dire in some places, and the countries who've actually made better government decisions in terms of the vaccination, their approach to COVID, are going to attract a lot of talent. That's I mean, we can already see right now. I mean, Australia is really struggling with closed borders. I mean, SEEK has probably one of the highest level of job ads right now that I've ever had, and they can't fill them because as a country we just don't have the talent here. And that's what we can see because we sit here, but it's exactly the same issues in other parts of the world. So there is kind of that talent arbitrage based on the fact that some countries have done better from their decisions as to how they manage, whether this is vaccination or whether this is COVID measures. Yeah, that's a certainty. And so, that's up to the governments to create. I mean, the Australian government created more visas as to bring people in because they do realize that it's going to be a necessity. So we're going to have some immigration, kind of wars between countries in terms of, okay, we need to make our country attractive.
Yeah, and I think, Jamie kind of alluded to it. I think as time goes on, we'll probably start to see, certainly from a mobility perspective, we've got the standard packages around having cost of living and those sort of things. I think we're going to have to start to consider, especially when it comes to, hesitancies from people who probably were quite resilient and able to travel before. But, certain attributes moving forward that we may need to consider and may need to perhaps compensate for or come up with some attractive packaging, I guess, to incentivize people certainly to move to certain locations moving forward. Vincent, that has been very insightful. Thank you so much for your time today. It's something that we wanted to put together, certainly for all the mobility practitioners out there like me who are, making sure that we stay on top of our craft, but also to understand, you know, what the other industries are doing, what they're thinking about. And I love the sound of your structure. It sounds very forward thinking and very consultative at its nature in relation to what's next for organizations, not only from a mobility, but from a holistic talent perspective. So I'd love to see that come to fruition for you and also for organizations moving forward. Again, thank you for your time. And on behalf of Jamie and I, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. No, Vincent, it's been really insightful. And, you know, I think that having someone who's been in the big organisations, sitting in the mobility team, and someone who is now working with those same organisations to get talent, it's been really great to have you share your knowledge and information. I'm sure a lot of people benefit from the words that you said. And I'll tell you, the tsunami's coming. I think the talent tsunami, the post-COVID tsunami, I think everybody has to buckle up, because I think it's going to be just as exciting, as interesting, as crazy and as unpredictable as COVID has been. So, yeah, we look forward to it.
Absolutely. We'll all be in there.
Thanks, Vincent.
Cheers. Have a lovely one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.